born ready.
What's up, everybody? My name is Isaiah Rivera. Highest vertical jump in the world, officially tested. This is my coach, John Evans. This is Austin Burke, also jumps extremely high. We all jump really high, actually. And we've, more importantly, been able to improve from being good to better and better and better, which is harder to do than just getting a beginner better. Which, by the way, today we're going to show you something that is going to increase your genetic potential. Yes, you should be periodizing your training as a beginner. That way you can have a higher ceiling. We're going to show you exactly how to do that by first covering a topic called macrocycles. All right? Before we get into it, if you do want to get coached by us to jump higher, you can go to THPstrength.com and use the code THP for 10% off of your first month. Having said that, John, first off, what is periodization, and then what is a macrocycle?
So periodization is planning. That's all it is. It means you structure your training into certain periods of time, and then over those periods of time, you have changes that happen to allow for maximal adaptation. And a macrocycle is the largest functional building block of periodization. It is the
So it's like Lego pieces,
like
and,
Lego
this
pieces.
is the biggest
This is
Lego
the biggest
piece.
Lego piece. Or
Wow.
it's like when you look at the whole plan, this is like
Or it's
We'll
one
get through it.
big
We'll go
Lego
through it. Yeah,
piece.
yeah,
It's one big Lego
it's-
piece, and it's got little Lego pieces inside of it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's maybe a better way. Like, what are those little dolls?
Or actually,
you know
or a
those little
puzzle.
dolls?
It's like a big puzzle.
Yeah.
This is the whole
there you
puzzle.
go. So, quickly, macrocycle typically is a year long, and mesocycles are typically a month. Microcycles are a week. We'll get into those another time. We're just going to cover macrocycles here. Going to try to do it clear, concise, and concretely. So, I have a couple concepts that I want to discuss during this. One is the goal of a macrocycle, and that is to plan when you are going to peak, whether that is going to be in a 3-month period of time, 6-month, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year. Isaiah, what was your experience you talked about on the call today?
Yeah. Somebody asked me on a group call, which, by the way, you get 4 with each one of us when you sign up for THP. One of the athletes we train asked me, do I do what is it called? A shakeout. Do I do a shakeout before I'm going to deload? Or before my session during the deload week? And I told them that I used to do a shakeout pretty religiously once a month during my deload week. But now I don't care. I do not care about my performance after a mesocycle is over. What I care about is how I perform at the end of the macrocycle. So my overall time frame on how I look at my training and when I perform has been zoomed out a lot. I used to care even before I started training with John. I used to care about my performance session to session, day to day, and
That was a very hard habit to break.
and there would be dunk depression, when I would have a bad dunk session after training all week, and I'd be like, John, why am I jumping lower? I used to think you'd have to jump lower. You'd have to jump well every session
To get better. Yeah.
So that was a belief that was broken. Then what I broke later on was it doesn't even matter if I train for a month and I jump well. I don't even care about that anymore. Now I'm going to train hard as hell for 6 months, not care about how I do during those 6 months, and then I peak. And that's usually how long my macrocycles are now. We basically peak 2 times per year, 1 time in the winter, 1 time in the summer, and that's usually when I test my vertical and aim to have my actual highest jumps and break my previous PRs. Aside from that, I do not care how I perform.
And that really challenges the assumption. And this assumption, I feel like a lot of people have. Stephen Selly had this assumption the first time I talked to him. And that is that you should always be jumping your highest. You should always be getting better. You should always be a better organism or a better product. If you train, that training should result in you jumping higher immediately. And if it doesn't, then it's not effective. And every time you go through a strength cycle, power cycle, speed cycle, you are a better product and your vertical will never go down again. And that assumption is untrue. If you were to look at some of the old training videos that Stephen Selly puts up, he would talk about, well, I'm in a strength phase, I'm in a power phase, I'm in a jumping phase or whatever else. That's like how he would kind of break it up. And he would think like, I always should be jumping my highest in this given phase, and I should never be moving backwards ever. The reality is that's not true. Your biology is this fluid thing that is always going up and it's always going down. It changes minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. The point of cycling and periodization is to allow yourself to have the best biological advantage when you want to be performing your best. That's what track and field athletes do when they go to the Olympics, which is a quadrennial macrocycle. It's what Isaiah does every 3 to 6 months. Typically it's biannually, so we have 2 macrocycles, and you could even call those, if you wanted, you could call them like, I don't even know, you could maybe call it the whole year something different. But Typically, that's what I use is a 2-peak year, and I usually peak in the winter, and I usually peak in the summer. And the reason why is because dunking is arbitrary, meaning there's no competitive cycle saying this is when you want to peak, which is why peaking is, I guess I had it on the other side of the board, but peaking is really what the purpose of Macrocycles is. The purpose is to figure out when you want to be at your absolute best. So this is relevant because if you're going to dunk camp, this is literally what we want to see happen in the next week or two, realistically, and then maybe a second peak a month later. But we'll get into that maybe another
And there
time.
are early signs. If you've been watching the videos I've been putting up, I'm jumping the highest I have all year, which aligns with what is supposed to be happening. Arguably, might have happened a little too early.
We're testing something else with Isaiah. We're trying to increase his jump volume and do a functional overreach ahead of camp. So specificity is at its highest, intensity is at its highest, and volume is relatively high for that specific quality. But the overall volume is really low. His volume in the weight room is low. His volume of moving in general is relatively low. But when he does move, it's really, really intense shit. And in the weight, yeah, it's quick. See that? It kind of scares you. And when you're in the weight room, even in the weight room, he's gotten more general in the weight room. We're really just doing general
Stay
squats,
healthy.
stay healthy. Yeah, it's not, there's no specific training stimuli in there, and try to maintain power output with cleans. So one of the things you want to see when you're looking at a macro cycle year to year is that the workload increases. Meaning, if I am looking at Isaiah from 2020 to 2024, I know that the year of 2020, he did way less load volume relative to the total amount that he's done in 2024. So if you were to take all the reps and all the weight that he did for each individual rep, and you multiplied those by each other and then added them all up, his workload in 2020 should be significantly less compared to what it is now. Annually or macrocycle to macrocycle, if you're using a year-long plan, you usually want to see a 5 to 10% change in workload. So his workload every year should climb up. This kind of comes down to this bottom point here, which is beginners versus elites. If you're an elite athlete, there is a point of diminishing returns where you won't be able year to year to increase the amount of workload. So if you're in this for the long haul, if you want to make long-term athletic developments and you want to reach your true genetic potential, then you need to keep that in mind when you're planning training from month to month, year to year, and biannually to biannually. And then if you're looking at how long each one is, we talked about that. It should be anywhere from three months to 4 years, but you could do a 2-month macro cycle if you really wanted and run those all the time. It's whatever you want. It's just commonly you're going to need at least 3 months to get a considerable amount of progression in that period of time where you adapt to actually build up adaptation. And in a 4-year example, like if you're quadrennial cycle or an Olympic cycle for macro cycles, what that is like if I'm an Olympian, I know I compete in 2020 and I compete in 2024. So if Isaiah knows he has 4 years and he has world championships maybe every year, maybe we do a little peak each time for that. But my big goal is in 2024, he's jumping highest or higher than he's ever been. If you look at track and field athletes, when do they typically run their absolute fastest? The year either before or during the Olympics. The next year after an Olympic cycle is generally not that impressive. But the year of is when you see a lot of those world records get broken. And that's because the coach is, well, good coaches should be trying to get their athletes to perform their absolute best in an Olympic year, in a competitive year. So how does that change in terms of volumes and intensities? What you should see happen is that athletes who are going to be performing at a higher level, their intensity climbs up year to year. Their specificity gets increasingly more. So an elite athlete, year to year, Isaiah has done more and more jumping at a higher level. His vertical has gone up, so he can perform higher outputs in his jump sessions. His power clean has gone up, so he can perform higher outputs in his power clean sessions. His back squat has gone up, so he can perform higher absolute weights in his back squat sessions. So year to year, again, workload is a function of intensity and volume. It's gone up every single year. That's how it's changed. Then if we look at volume, the change in volume is relative to the workload. You typically can't have intensity climb up and specificity climb up and have volume climb up. So what I try to do, and some coaches probably have a nuance of this, is I try to maintain volume at least, or maintain volume. So Isaiah, I'll ask you this. How do you think your volumes have changed, or how have I manipulated volumes? And Austin, you might have an opinion on this, as you guys have gone from beginner to elite. We talked about the intensity thing. I think that's pretty true. But how has volumes changed for you guys?
Yeah, if you look at, I started working with John doing full jump training, not just rehab for my knees, around 2019. And if you compare my workouts like a similar cycle to a similar cycle. So let's say a general cycle focused on hypertrophy work. The volumes have been insane. This last general cycle that I did back in April was ridiculous. And what's funny is that each year I think it's ridiculous, but then the next year is always even more.
It's even harder.
Even more ridiculous. So the volumes the total workload itself is way higher. I also have gotten a lot stronger. So if you look at like the total, is it poundage, tonnage?
I think it's tonnage is what people say.
The total tonnage. So it's like sets times reps times weight lifted is insanely greater compared to
load
even
volume.
Load volume to just 2 years ago even. So yeah, there's definitely been a huge increase in the total workload.
And it's not perfect when you look at low volume because, like, what if you're doing an isometric and you're doing it for 5 seconds? Like, you can't really account for that. But Austin actually has a different experience. So, Austin, you can take the mic now. When I started coaching you, what was your total workload, volume and intensity, compared to even, let's say, like a year or two ago?
Oh, it was definitely way higher. The workouts probably lasted around 3 hours.
They were 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah, they were rough. Yeah, the volume was just way higher. A lot more general work, a lot more bodybuilding circuits, mixed in on the the main lift days, right?
No, all of it.
It was on every day. Yeah.
No. I'm just saying, what was
I'm
the
just
general?
trying to break it down. I'm just trying to break it down. Yeah.
I had sometimes I would put Oles on every day, and then sometimes I would put complexes back in. Some of those cycles got erased in the period of time of me switching jobs, so they don't exist anymore. But you can go back to the early cycles in 2018? I think I have some that are still saved that you can look at, and they're vastly different. So you might be wondering, well, John, that doesn't follow this year-to-year workload change. Why isn't he increased his workload year-to-year? And that's because the baseline I set, the standard I set, was way too intense, way too much. Yeah. So Isaiah kind of helped me understand, and Austin, over the years, and coaching all the other athletes, that what I expected of my athletes, that my mentors taught me they could handle, most times athletes could not realistically handle. So I had the experience of working with Olympians, working with decathletes who are training 2 to 3 hours a day and can invest, 2 hours in a general day and make that as important as their intense, specific, high-intensity day. Over the years, that's changed a lot. So the one way in which maybe it does still apply, and goes back to what I said about beginners versus elites, is early on, how specific or how crazy were the types of training stimuli that I gave you guys? Like, just think of like a true squat, for example, compared to now, right? Like, when was the first year? How many years was it before you guys saw even a true squat in your training cycle?
Probably like 2 years in, 2 or 3
maybe
years
2 to
in.
3, right?
Yeah.
And then what about, have I even really employed plyos with you guys at this point?
Very rarely for me.
I mean, I've done, I think 2 or 3 cycles where there's been plyos.
Yeah, I think.
And I mean, I've been training with you for
how many months of total?
5 years. 5 years now. That's 60 months. So out of the 60 months, I've done 3.
Wait, I've completed 1 cycle of plyos the whole time I've been training with you.
I did load management 4. That was, I think, the first time we ever did a plyo cycle. Do you want to include barbell squat jumps when I did that, or are we talking true?
I'm talking plyos.
Yeah, so
I can think of one.
Load management 4. When I did depth jumps this last time, that was half a cycle. And then
you did 1 session of maybe 2 sessions. Of
and then what was the previous? It was like earlier last year.
I can think of a handful of.
Oh,
days.
and in 29, we did.
I could think of like Carolina. You did half a cycle this past year of plyos, of like true plyometrics, what I would consider like traditional textbook plyos. You did a cycle in 29, 1 month of different types of depth jumps. I don't even know.
No. There was one where I did single leg.
You did single leg hops
and bounding.
That was in
29 as well.
So you did that also when we lived in Los
In the span of a year, there was 2 cycles there, like full cycles.
That you did. You completed
29.
successfully.
So 2 of them there.
Before that, I can't.
North Carolina.
You didn't get through any plyos there. Yeah, I did. What did you get through?
We were under the thingy, and we were doing like hops, like doom.
Yeah. But there was like 2 days that happened.
Yeah.
I think it was like, I remember vividly like 2 sessions it actually occurring, and it was capped intensity.
And then during COVID, when my back was messed up, and TFL was messed up, I did something there. I can pull up the videos.
You can pull up the videos.
Yeah.
But off the top of our head,
it averages out to like once a year.
I've done
sometimes twice a year.
I've done 1 full cycle. That was recently with you. Other than that, I make a week through and then I'm out.
And the reason why is because intensity changes year to year and goes up, and specificity goes up. So what has to happen
This tree is
as
really
guys,
clutch.
I know it's really covering everything. So what has happened is as they've become more elite, those stimuli become more and more intense. And as I said, the change in intensity over time and specificity increases. One, I can't afford to have them do that year round because the intensity and specificity of jumping, their actual skill, is so intense. I can't do it all the time. And then two, if I were to have them do it more of the time, they would get hurt almost immediately. They just can't handle it. Their outputs are too high, and the requirement for them to stay healthy is either they drop their intent or they do such small, seemingly ambiguous volumes that it's almost irrelevant. So it's either don't do it at all, do it half-assedly, or do it really, really intense, very, very short, small bouts. Now, if they weren't doing dunk sessions, then I could probably get away with it. But at the end of the day, we dunk. Biggest mistake I ever made was doing too many plyos and not dunking enough. And I refuse to make that mistake with all my other athletes because I did plyos all the time. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have. Do you guys have anything else you want to add?
And that covered it pretty
Cool.
well.
Make sure you guys go to THPstrength.com and sign up for coaching if you want to get coached by myself, Isaiah, and Austin. Also, make
And
sure you like,
Subscribe.
comment, and subscribe.
That way you can find out when we talk about mesocycles.
Which is tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's the fun one. All right. We'll see you guys. Bye.